when SpaceX's moon rocket exploded in a fireball visible from space, killing 4 astronauts and destroying 10 years of dreams. The world waited for Elon Musk to explain the disaster. But his response 6 days later left everyone speechless and changed one man's life forever. This is the story of Carlos Valdez, a welder who thought he had killed 4 heroes, and the shocking truth that would shake the space industry to its core. But it all began on a perfect morning in Texas, when a father and son stood at a fence watching humanity reach for the stars. Boca Chica, Texas. October 14th, 2024. The sun painted the Texas sky orange as it rose over the SpaceX starbase. Miguel Valdez pressed his small face against the cold chain-link fence, his breath making fog clouds in the early morning air. At 8 years old, he had watched dozens of rocket tests from this exact spot. But today felt different. Today felt like magic. "Papa, look how tall it is." Miguel pointed at the massive silver rocket standing on the launch pad 3 miles away. The Starship towered 400 feet into the sky, taller than a 40-story building. Carlos Valdez smiled at his son's excitement. His rough hands, stained with welding burns and metal dust, rested on Miguel's shoulders. "I helped build that rocket, Mijo. See those black tiles on the side? I welded the frames that hold them on." Miguel's eyes grew wide. His papa was part of building spaceships. "Really? You worked on the rocket that's going to the moon?" "See, for almost 2 years. Every day after you went to school, I went to the factory and worked on different parts." Carlos pointed to sections of the rocket. "Those heat shield tiles will protect the astronauts when they come back to Earth. Without them, the rocket would burn up like a shooting star." Around the launch pad, hundreds of workers in bright orange jumpsuits moved like busy ants. Some drove small trucks loaded with equipment. Others climbed tall towers next to the rocket, checking systems and connections. Giant screens showed numbers and diagrams that Miguel couldn't understand. "How many people does it take to launch a rocket?" Miguel asked. "Thousands," Carlos said. "Engineers, welders, computer programmers, doctors, cooks, security guards. It takes a whole town of people to send 4 astronauts to the moon." Miguel counted on his fingers. "More people work on the rocket than live in our whole neighborhood." Inside the SpaceX control room 5 miles away, hundreds of people sat at rows of computer screens. The room hummed with quiet voices, clicking keyboards, and beeping machines. Giant displays on the walls showed the rocket from every angle. Elon Musk stood behind the engineers, watching everything. His hands shook slightly as he held his 5th cup of coffee since midnight. Dark circles under his eyes showed he hadn't slept much. The whole world was watching today. Presidents, scientists, and millions of kids like Miguel had their eyes on this moment. "Mr. Musk, the weather looks perfect," said Rebecca Martinez, the flight director. She was a small woman with short black hair and kind eyes. "Clear skies, light winds, everything we need for a safe launch." Elon nodded but didn't smile. He had dreamed of this day for over 10 years. Ever since he was a boy, he wanted to help humans explore space. Now, finally, people were going back to the moon for the first time in over 50 years. "How are our astronauts doing?" Elon asked. "Ready and excited," Rebecca answered. Sarah Chun says she feels like a kid on Christmas morning. High above them, 300 feet up in the tip of the rocket, astronaut Sarah Chun sat strapped into her seat. Through her helmet's clear visor, she could see the Gulf of Mexico stretching to the horizon like a blue carpet. Her heart beat fast with excitement and fear. Sarah thought about her 12-year-old daughter Emma back in Houston. Yesterday, Emma had drawn her a picture of the moon with "Come home safe, Mommy," written in purple crayon. Sarah folded the drawing and tucked it into her spacesuit pocket. "How are you feeling, Commander?" asked Marcus Webb, the pilot sitting next to her. His voice crackled through the radio in her helmet. "Like we're about to make history," Sarah said. She looked at her other 2 crew members, Li Wei and Dmitry Petrov. All 4 of them had trained for 3 years for this moment. They had practiced emergency procedures hundreds of times. They had studied moon maps until they could draw them from memory. Back at the fence, Miguel bounced on his toes with excitement. "Papa, when will it launch?" Carlos checked his phone. "T-minus 30 minutes, Mijo. That means 30 minutes until liftoff." "What's T-minus mean?" "It's countdown time. T stands for takeoff. So T-minus 30 means 30 minutes before takeoff." Miguel nodded seriously, like he was learning the most important information in the world. The rocket held 1,200 tons of fuel. That's as heavy as 600 cars. The fuel was super cold, so cold it would freeze your tongue instantly. Ice formed on the outside of the rocket like frost on a winter window. Inside the rocket's base, 33 powerful engines waited to fire. Each engine was as big as a small car and cost $2 million. Together, they would create more power than 15 jumbo jets taking off at the same time. "Papa, what if something goes wrong?" Miguel asked quietly. Carlos knelt down to Miguel's level. "The engineers have checked everything 1,000 times. They have backup plans for backup plans. These rockets are safer than the car we drove here." Miguel seemed satisfied with this answer. He trusted his papa completely. At SpaceX Mission Control, Rebecca Martinez's voice came over the speakers. "All stations, this is flight. T-minus 15 minutes and counting. Final systems checks are complete. Weather is go. Range is clear." One by one, different teams reported their status. Propulsion is go. Life support is go. Navigation is go. Recovery team is standing by. Every system showed green lights on the big screens. Everything looked perfect, but 200 feet underground, in the rocket's massive fuel tank, something was wrong. A tiny crack, thinner than a human hair, grew slowly along a welded seam. The crack was invisible to cameras and too small for sensors to detect. It had been there for 3 months, growing bit by bit each time the tank was filled and emptied. During tests, the crack was so small that even if someone looked directly at it with a magnifying glass, they might miss it. But inside the fuel tank, with 500 tons of super cold liquid pressing against it, the crack was getting bigger. T-minus 10 minutes and counting, Rebecca announced. Miguel grabbed his papa's hand. "It's really happening." Carlos squeezed his son's small fingers. "See, Mijo, history is happening right in front of us." All around them, other families had gathered at the fence. Some people had driven from hundreds of miles away just to watch. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Teenagers took selfies with the rocket in the background. Everyone wanted to remember this moment. T-minus 5 minutes and counting. The rocket began to make soft rumbling sounds as its systems came alive. Fuel pumps started moving thousands of gallons per minute. Computer systems ran final checks on millions of parts. Sarah Chen closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a prayer. She thought about Neil Armstrong, the first person to walk on the moon 55 years ago. She thought about Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. She thought about all the astronauts who came before her, especially the ones who never made it home. "We're doing this for all of humanity," she whispered to herself. T-minus 2 minutes and counting. All systems are go for launch. The control room fell quiet except for the hum of computers and air conditioning. Hundreds of people held their breath. At the fence, Miguel pressed against the metal links so hard they left marks on his face. His papa lifted him up so he could see better. T-minus 1 minute and counting. The rocket's engines began their startup sequence. Deep rumbles echoed across the Texas desert. The ground started to vibrate under everyone's feet. Inside the fuel tank, the tiny crack felt the pressure building. The super cold fuel pushed against the metal walls with tremendous force. T-minus 30 seconds. Miguel's heart pounded. This was it. This was really happening. T-minus 20 seconds. Sarah Chun felt the rocket start to shake as the engines prepared to fire. T-minus 10 seconds. The automatic voice began the final countdown. 10, 9, 8. Everyone at the fence counted along. 7, 6, 5. Deep in the fuel tank, the tiny crack suddenly grew longer. 4, 3, 2. The crack raced across the metal like lightning. 1. Ignition. The first engine burst to life with a pillar of orange flame. Then the second engine fired. Then the third. And then the tiny crack tore completely open. In less than 1 second. 500 tons of super cold fuel mixed with hot engine flames. The explosion was brighter than the sun. For 1 terrible second, the whole world turned white. The blast was so bright that people 20 miles away saw the flash. Car alarms started going off across 3 counties. Birds fell from the sky, stunned by the shock wave. Miguel screamed and buried his face in his papa's chest. Carlos wrapped his arms around his son and turned away from the fence. Even with his eyes closed, the light burned through his eyelids like staring into a welding torch. The sound came next. Not the rumble of rocket engines they expected, but a thunderclap that shook the earth. Windows broke in houses 5 miles away. The metal fence Miguel had been pressed against rattled like a giant's chains. Then came the heat wave. A wall of burning air that made everyone's skin feel like they were standing too close to a campfire. The smell of burned metal and fuel filled the air, sharp and bitter. When the white light finally faded, Miguel looked up. Where the beautiful silver rocket had stood just seconds before, there was nothing but a towering column of black smoke and orange flames. Pieces of metal rained down like deadly confetti, splashing into the Gulf of Mexico with huge splashes. "Papa, what happened?" Miguel's voice was tiny and scared. "Where did the rocket go?" Carlos couldn't answer. His throat felt closed up. The rocket he had helped build for 2 years was gone. Just gone. And somewhere in that explosion, 4 people had been flying to the moon. All around them, families started crying. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Teenagers stopped taking selfies and stared in shock. The happy crowd of space fans became a group of scared, confused people who had just watched something terrible happen 0.3 miles away. At the launch pad, emergency sirens wailed. Fire trucks raced toward the explosion site, but there was nothing left to save. The launch tower was twisted metal. The concrete pad was cracked and blackened. Burning fuel spread across the ground. Like a lake of fire, Coast Guard boats sped toward the water where rocket pieces were still falling. They knew they were looking for survivors, but everyone understood the truth. No one could survive an explosion like that. In the SpaceX control room, every computer screen showed the same thing: static. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room that had been buzzing with excitement was now silent as a tomb. Rebecca Martinez was the first person to speak. Her voice shook as she pressed the emergency button. "All stations, implement emergency procedures. Lock down the area. Search and rescue teams to the water immediately." But there was no rescue to do. The crew compartment where Sarah Chun, Marcus Webb, Li Wei, and Dmitry Petrov had been sitting was scattered across miles of ocean. The people who were supposed to walk on the moon would never walk anywhere again. Engineers stared at their screens in disbelief. How could this happen? Every system had shown green lights. Every safety check had passed. The rocket was perfect until suddenly it wasn't. "Flight, what are your orders?" asked the range safety officer. Rebecca felt like she might throw up. "Ground. All operations immediately. Secure the site. Begin data recovery procedures." She paused, knowing the next words would be the hardest she'd ever spoken. And contact the families. Back in the viewing area, news reporters who had come to cover a historic moon launch suddenly had a completely different story. Some ran toward the explosion site with their cameras. Others pointed their lenses at Elon Musk, waiting to capture his reaction to the worst disaster in SpaceX history. Elon stood perfectly still. His face showed no emotion at all. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the pillar of black smoke rising into the clear blue Texas sky. "Mr. Musk," shouted a reporter from CNN. "What happened? What went wrong?" Elon didn't answer. He didn't even seem to hear the question. "Mr. Musk, do you have a statement for the families?" Still nothing. Elon might as well have been a statue. "Sir, are you going to shut down the space program?" Finally, Elon turned and walked away from the cameras. He moved slowly, like he was in a dream. Security guards cleared a path as he headed toward the SpaceX building. His footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. The world was watching, and Elon Musk had nothing to say. Within minutes, the news spread everywhere. CNN interrupted regular programming. The BBC sent breaking news alerts. Social media exploded with videos of the disaster. Hashtag SpaceX explosion started trending worldwide. In living rooms across America, families watched the same footage over and over. The beautiful rocket standing tall, the countdown, the first engine firing, then the terrible white flash that erased everything. The stock market crashed. SpaceX's value dropped by $50 billion in the first hour. Other space companies saw their stocks fall too, as investors lost faith in commercial spaceflight. NASA immediately announced that all future missions would be suspended pending investigation. The European Space Agency canceled their partnership agreements. Even countries that had been planning to buy SpaceX rockets started looking for other options. But the real damage couldn't be measured in money. In Houston, Sarah Chin's 12-year-old daughter Emma was at school when the principal came to get her from math class. Emma knew something was wrong when she saw her grandmother waiting in the office with tears in her eyes. "Where's Mommy?" Emma asked. "She was supposed to call me from space tonight." Her grandmother knelt down and took Emma's hands. "There was an accident, sweetheart. The rocket had a problem." Emma's drawing of the moon, with "Come home safe, Mommy," written in purple crayon, was still in Sarah's spacesuit pocket. But Sarah would never come home to see it. Russia, Dmitry Petrov's father was watching the launch live on television. He saw his son's rocket explode and immediately called his wife. They held each other and cried, thinking about their boy who had dreamed of space since he was 5 years. In China, Li Wei's parents got a phone call from Mission Control. They didn't speak English very well, but they understood enough. Their daughter, who had become an astronaut to inspire girls everywhere, was gone. Marcus Webb's wife was also watching from Mission Control. She had been so proud, telling everyone how her husband was finally living his dream. Now she was a widow at 34 years old. Back at the fence, Carlos finally found his voice. "We need to go home, Mijo." "But Papa, what about the astronauts? Are they okay?" Carlos looked down at his son's innocent face. Miguel still believed that astronauts were heroes who always came home safe. How could he explain that sometimes heroes don't make it? "I don't know, hijo. I hope so." But Carlos did know. Everyone knew. The explosion was too big, too violent. No one could survive that. As they walked back to their car, Miguel asked, "Papa, will they build another rocket?" "I don't know, Mijo. Will you help build it?" Carlos stopped walking. He thought about the rocket he had spent 2 years building. He thought about the heat shield tiles he had welded so carefully. He thought about how proud he had been to tell Miguel that his papa helped build spaceships. Now 4 people were dead, and somewhere in that wreckage was his work, his welding, his craftsmanship. "I don't know," he whispered again. The drive home was quiet. Miguel fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted by the morning's emotions. Carlos drove slowly, thinking about what he would tell his wife. How do you come home from watching a moon launch and explain that you saw people die instead? On the radio, news announcers tried to make sense of what happened. They interviewed space experts who all said the same thing. This was SpaceX's worst disaster ever. Some said the company might never recover. Others wondered if humans should go to space at all. Carlos turned off the radio. He didn't want to hear any more. At SpaceX headquarters, Elon finally reached his office. He closed the door and sat in his chair, staring at a photo on his desk. It showed the first Falcon Heavy launch, when his own car was sent into space. That had been a celebration. Today was a funeral. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Musk?" "The president is on line 1. NASA administrator is on line 2. The families are asking for..." "Not now," Elon said quietly. "Sir, the whole world is waiting for a statement." "I said not now." Elon put his head in his hands. For people had trusted him with their lives. Thousands of employees had worked for years to make this mission possible. Millions of people had believed in the dream of returning to the moon. And in 5 seconds, it was all destroyed. Outside his window, the black smoke column was finally starting to fade. But Elon knew the real smoke was just beginning. The investigations, the lawsuits, the congressional hearings, the end of everything he had built. His phone buzzed with a text message from his brother. "Are you okay?" Elon stared at the message. For a long time. Was he okay? For people were dead. His life's work was in ruins. The whole world was watching and waiting for him to explain the unexplainable. He turned off his phone without answering. Outside SpaceX headquarters, news vans lined the street like metal vultures. Reporters with microphones stood in front of cameras, telling the world about the disaster. Helicopters circled overhead, taking pictures of the smoking launch pad from the sky. But inside the building, everything was eerily quiet. Engineers sat at their desks staring at blank computer screens. Some cried silently. Others just looked, lost, like children who had dropped their ice cream. The cafeteria was empty. The hallways echoed with footsteps of people who didn't know where they were going. Rebecca Martinez walked through the mission control room, checking on her team. Most of them were still at their stations, even though there was nothing left to control. Their job had been to guide 4 astronauts to the moon. Now their job was to figure out what went wrong. "How are you holding up, Janet?" Rebecca asked, a young engineer who was studying data on her screen. Janet looked up with red, puffy eyes. I keep checking the life support readings, hoping I made a mistake, hoping the crew is somehow still alive up there. Rebecca put her hand on Janet's shoulder. I know, we all keep hoping. But hope was a dangerous thing right now. The explosion had been captured by dozens of cameras from different angles. There was no doubt about what happened. The rocket had blown up with 4 people inside. Do we know what caused it yet? Janet asked. Not yet. The investigation team is still collecting pieces. Rebecca sighed. It could take months to figure out exactly what went wrong. 3 miles away, emergency crews were still working at the launch pad. The concrete platform was cracked and burned black. Twisted metal from the rocket lay scattered across an area, the size of 10 football fields. Pieces had landed as far as 2 miles away. Fire trucks sprayed foam on the last burning spots. Coast Guard boats searched the water for any piece that might hold clues. Every fragment would be important for understanding what happened at the Valdez house. Carlos sat at his kitchen table with his head in his hands. His wife Maria had made him coffee, but it was getting cold. Miguel was in the living room, building rockets out of toy blocks and making them explode. Boom, Miguel said, knocking down his block rocket. Just like today. Maria frowned. Miguel, that's not a game. People got hurt today. But Papa builds rockets that don't explode, right, Papa? Carlos looked up at his son. Miguel's innocent question felt like a knife in his chest. Did he build rockets that don't explode? Was this somehow his fault? Carlos, what's wrong? Maria asked, sitting down next to him. You've been quiet since you came home. 4 people died today, Maria. 4 people who trusted that rocket to keep them safe. That's terrible, but it's not your fault. You're just one worker out of thousands. Carlos wanted to believe that, but he couldn't stop thinking about every weld he had made, every connection he had finished. Had he made a mistake? Had he missed something important? The phone rang. It was Carlos's supervisor from SpaceX. Carlos, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. The investigation team wants to talk to everyone who worked on the rocket. Investigation team. NASA, FAA, maybe some people from Congress. They're going to ask questions about your work, your procedures, everything. Carlos felt his stomach drop. Am I in trouble? I don't know. Just answer their questions honestly, and you'll be fine. After hanging up, Carlos told Maria about the phone call. Why do they want to talk to you specifically? She asked. I worked on the fuel tanks. The explosion started somewhere in the propulsion system. Maria's eyes widened. You think it was something you did? I don't know. I hope not. That night, Carlos couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about every day he had spent working on the rocket. He remembered welding the heat shield frames, connecting fuel lines, checking and double-checking every joint. He had been so careful, so proud of his work. Other welders sometimes rushed through jobs, but not Carlos. He took his time. He did things right. But what if he had made one tiny mistake? What if he had missed one small crack that grew bigger over time? Down the hall, Miguel was also awake. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he knew his papa was sad. Miguel got out of bed and tiptoed to his parents' room. Papa, are you okay? Carlos sat up and lifted Miguel onto the bed. I'm just thinking, Mijo, about the rocket. See, Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Papa, when I build something and it breaks, Mama says it's okay to try again. Carlos hugged his son tight. Sometimes when grown-up things break, it's harder to fix. But you're the best builder in the world, Papa. You can fix anything. If only it were that simple, Carlos thought. The next morning, news trucks lined the street outside the SpaceX factory. Reporters tried to interview workers as they arrived, but security guards kept them back. Carlos walked through the employee entrance with his head down. Inside, the normally busy factory floor was strangely quiet. Half the workers had been sent home while the investigation started. In conference room A, 5 serious-looking people in suits sat around a table. 2 were from NASA, 1 from the FAA, 1 from Congress, and 1 from SpaceX's legal department. Mr. Valdez, please sit down, said the NASA investigator, a tall woman with gray hair. We need to ask you some questions about your work on the Starship fuel tanks. Carlos sat down nervously. His hands were sweating. Can you tell us about your welding procedures? She asked. For the next 3 hours, they asked Carlos about everything. What tools did he use? How did he test his welds? Who checked his work? Did he ever take shortcuts? Carlos answered every question honestly. He showed them photos of his work. He explained his training and experience. He had been welding for 15 years and had never had a serious problem. "Mr. Valdez," said the FAA investigator, "do you remember working on fuel tank number 7? Carlos thought for a moment. "Yes, that was about 3 months ago. I welded the main structural joints." "Do you remember anything unusual about that job?" "No, everything went normally. I followed all procedures and passed all inspections." The investigators looked at each other. Carlos couldn't read their expressions. "That's all for now, Mr. Valdez. We may need to talk to you again." As Carlos left the conference room, he felt even more worried. Why were they asking about fuel tank number 7 specifically? Had something gone wrong with his work? That afternoon, the first news reports started coming out about the investigation. A reporter on CNN said, "Sources tell us investigators are focusing on a possible fuel tank failure. Several workers are being questioned about manufacturing procedures." Carlos watched the news with growing dread. Were they talking about him? Was his name going to be on television as the person who caused the explosion? By evening, SpaceX stock had dropped another 20%. Elon Musk still hadn't made any public statements. The families of the crew were asking for answers that nobody had yet, and somewhere in the wreckage scattered across the Texas coast, pieces of fuel tank number 7 were waiting to tell their story. 3 days after the explosion, Coast Guard divers found the largest piece of the fuel tank buried in sand, 20 feet underwater. The metal was twisted and blackened, but the serial numbers were still visible. Tank 007. Dr. James Patterson, SpaceX's chief engineer, stood on the Coast Guard boat as divers brought the wreckage to the surface. Water dripped from the mangled metal as a crane lifted it onto the deck. There, Dr. Patterson pointed to a jagged tear in the tank wall. That's where it started. The crack ran along a welded seam like a lightning bolt frozen in metal. Dr. Patterson took photos from every angle, his hands shaking slightly. This piece of twisted steel held the answer to why 4 people had died. Back on shore, the investigation team worked in a temporary building near the launch pad. Tables covered with rocket pieces looked like a giant jigsaw puzzle made of metal and dreams. "We need to find who welded this seam," said Dr. Sarah Kim, the NASA lead investigator. She held a magnifying glass over the cracked metal. "The welding records should tell us exactly who worked on Tank 7. 2 hours later, they had their answer. Carlos Valdez, employee number 4847, read the quality control manager. He completed the main structural welds on Tank 7 on July 15th, passed all initial inspections. Dr. Kim made notes on her tablet. "I want to see his personnel file, his training records, and every inspection report for Tank 7. Carlos Valdez, the man whose 8-year-old son watched every rocket launch, the man who took pride in building spaceships, the man who was about to become the most famous welder in the world for all the wrong reasons. The Valdez house." Carlos paced back and forth in his living room. Maria sat on the couch, watching her husband worry himself sick. "Maybe I should call in sick tomorrow," Carlos said. "I don't think I can face going back to work." "Carlos, you haven't done anything wrong. You're a good welder. Everyone knows that. But what if I made a mistake? What if I missed something?" Miguel looked up from his coloring book. "Papa, why are you so sad?" Carlos knelt down next to his son. "Papa's just worried about work, Mijo. Did you get in trouble?" "I don't know yet." Miguel hugged his father's neck. "Don't worry, Papa. You're the best worker in the whole world." If only Miguel's faith could make everything better, Carlos thought. The next morning brought terrible news. Carlos was eating breakfast when his phone rang. It was his supervisor, and his voice sounded strange. "Carlos, I need you to come in right away. Don't talk to any reporters. Don't talk to anyone. Just come straight to my office." "What's wrong? Just come in." Now, Carlos drove to work with his stomach in knots. The parking lot was full of news vans. Reporters with cameras pointed them at every car, hoping to catch someone important. Carlos parked in the back and snuck in through the employee entrance. Workers stared at him as he walked through the hallways. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked angry. Everyone knew something he didn't. His supervisor, Mr. Johnson, was waiting in his office with 2 people Carlos didn't recognize. "Carlos, sit down," Mr. Johnson said. "This is Dr. Patterson from engineering and Ms. Rodriguez from legal." Carlos sat down, his hands sweating. Dr. Patterson opened a folder and pulled out photos of the cracked fuel tank. Carlos, do you recognize this welding work? Carlos studied the photos. Even twisted and burned, he could see his welding pattern. The way he always made his joints, the technique he had perfected over 15 years. Yes, he said quietly. That's my work. The crack started right along this welded seam. Dr. Patterson continued. Our preliminary analysis suggests the weld failed under pressure. Carlos felt like the room was spinning. Are you saying I caused the explosion? We're saying the failure originated from your welding work. We don't know why yet. Ms. Rodriguez, the lawyer, leaned forward. Carlos, we need to ask you some difficult questions. Did you follow all safety procedures when you welded Tank 7? Of course I did. I always follow procedures. Were you having any personal problems at the time? Financial stress, family issues, anything that might have distracted you? Carlos's face turned red. Are you asking if I was drunk? If I didn't care about my work? We have to ask these questions, Carlos. For people are dead. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't thought about nothing else for 3 days? Dr. Patterson showed him more photos. Carlos, look at this section. Do you see how the metal fractured? This suggests the weld was incomplete, like it wasn't heated properly. Carlos stared at the photos. He remembered that day in July. It had been hot and humid. The air conditioning in the welding bay had been broken, but he had been careful. He was always careful. I don't understand, Carlos said. My work passed all inspections. Quality control signed off on everything. Sometimes defects don't show up until later, Dr. Patterson explained. A small flaw can grow over time, especially under the stress of multiple fuel loadings. So you're saying this is my fault? The room was quiet for a moment. Finally, Ms. Rodriguez spoke. Carlos, we're going to have to suspend you pending the full investigation. You'll be paid, but you can't work on any active projects. Suspended. Carlos felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. It's just temporary, Mr. Johnson said, until we understand what happened. How long? We don't know. Maybe weeks, maybe months. Carlos thought about Miguel, about how proud his son was that his papa built spaceships. How could he go home and explain that he might have killed for people? Can I clean out my locker? Security will pack your things and send them to you. Carlos stood up on shaky legs. So that's it. 15 years of perfect work, and now I'm treated like a criminal. Carlos, we're not saying you're a criminal, Dr. Patterson said. But we have to follow the evidence. And the evidence says I killed 4 astronauts. The evidence says the failure started with your weld. We don't know why yet. Carlos walked to the door, then turned back. Those 4 people, I would never hurt them. I spent 2 years working on that rocket because I believed in what they were doing. We know, Carlos. We know. But as Carlos left the building, he wondered if anyone would ever believe that again. Outside, reporters spotted him immediately. Mr. Valdez, are you the welder who worked on the failed tank? Did you make a mistake that killed the crew? How do you feel knowing your error caused this tragedy? Carlos pushed through the crowd without saying anything. He got in his car and drove away as fast as he could, leaving behind the job he had loved and the reputation he had spent 15 years building. At home, he sat in his driveway for 10 minutes, trying to figure out how to tell Maria and Miguel that their whole world had just changed. When he finally went inside, Miguel ran to hug him. Papa, why are you home early? Carlos picked up his son and held him tight, wondering if this might be one of the last times Miguel would look at him like he was a hero. That evening, news vans lined their street. Reporters knocked on their door every few minutes. The Valdez family had to close all their curtains and stay inside like prisoners in their own home. Papa, why are all those people outside? Miguel asked, peeking through the blinds. They want to ask Papa questions about work, Carlos said. Are you famous? Now, Carlos and Maria looked at each other. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that sometimes people become famous for terrible reasons? Something like that, Mijo. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, and people Carlos had never met all wanted to talk to him. Maria finally unplugged the phone. On television, the news showed Carlos's employee photo next to pictures of the explosion. The headline read, "Welder's error kills 4 astronauts." They're making it sound like I did it on purpose, Carlos said, staring at the screen. Turn it off, Maria said. Don't torture yourself. But Carlos couldn't stop watching. Every news channel was talking about him. Some called him careless. Others called him a murderer. None of them knew him, but they all had opinions about what kind of person he was. On CNN, a space expert said, "This shows why we can't trust important work to regular factory workers. Space missions need the highest level of expertise." Carlos had been welding for 15 years. He had never failed an inspection, but now he was just a regular factory worker who couldn't be trusted. The worst part was the interviews with the families. Sarah Chen's father appeared on NBC News. His eyes were red from crying. "My daughter trusted that rocket with her life. She trusted that every person who built it would do their job perfectly. Someone let her down." Carlos turned off the television and went to his bedroom. He lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like the worst person in the world. Meanwhile, at SpaceX headquarters, Elon Musk hadn't slept in 4 days. He sat in his office, drinking his 20th cup of coffee, reading reports about the investigation. Every few minutes, his assistant brought him new messages from reporters, politicians, and angry families. "Mr. Musk," his assistant said, "the president wants to speak with you. NASA Administrator Kozlov is demanding answers. And there are 300 reporters outside asking when you'll make a statement." Elon looked out his window at the crowd of news vans. What are they saying about Carlos Valdez? That he's responsible for the explosion. That his welding error killed the crew. Elon nodded slowly. "Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning. It's time I talk to the world." "What will you say?" "The truth." The next morning, 200 reporters gathered in the SpaceX parking lot. Camera crews from every major news network pointed their lenses at a small podium set up near the building. Entrance to the Valdez house. Carlos, Maria, and Miguel watched on television. Carlos expected Elon to announce that SpaceX was firing him and suing him for damages. "Maybe he'll say it wasn't your fault," Miguel said hopefully. Carlos shook his head. "Rich people like Elon Musk don't protect workers like me, Joe." At exactly 10 a.m., Elon walked out of the building. He looked tired and sad, but his steps were firm. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as he approached the podium. The crowd of reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Musk, will you shut down the space program? Are you going to fire Carlos Valdez? How do you respond to claims that SpaceX is unsafe?" Elon raised his hand for silence. The crowd went quiet. For 10 seconds, he just stood there, looking at the faces in front of him. Then he began to speak. 4 days ago, we lost 4 of the bravest people I've ever known. Sarah Chun, Marcus Webb, Li Wei, and Dmitry Petrov weren't just astronauts. They were parents, children, dreamers who believe that humanity's future lies among the stars. His voice was steady but sad. The reporters leaned forward, recording every word. "The explosion was caused by a structural failure in fuel tank number 7. Our investigation shows that a welded seam cracked under pressure, leading to catastrophic failure." Carlos gripped Maria's hand. Here it comes, he thought. Many of you want someone to blame. You want a simple answer to a complex tragedy. You want to point at one person and say, "This is who killed our heroes." Elon paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I'm here to tell you that person is me." Carlos sat up straight. What did Elon just say? "I am the CEO of SpaceX. Every decision, every timeline, every safety protocol comes from me. If there was a failure in our manufacturing process, it's because I didn't create good enough systems to prevent it." The crowd of reporters started murmuring. This wasn't what they expected. But more importantly, I want to address something that's been bothering me for 4 days. The media has focused on Carlos Valdez, the welder who worked on Tank 7. You've called him careless. You've blamed him for this tragedy. You've made his family's life a nightmare. Miguel jumped up from the couch. "Papa, he's talking about you." "That needs to stop right now," Elon continued. "Carlos Valdez is one of the finest welders I've ever worked with. His record is perfect. His dedication is unquestionable. And what happened to Tank 7 was not his fault." Carlos stared at the television in shock. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, was defending him on national television. "Carlos, if you're watching this, I want you to know something. You are not fired. You are not to blame. And we need you now more than ever." Maria started crying. Miguel cheered. Carlos couldn't speak. The failure in Tank 7 happened because our quality control systems weren't good enough. Because our inspection procedures missed a tiny flaw that grew over time. Because I pushed for a launch schedule that didn't allow enough time for perfect manufacturing. Elon's voice grew stronger as he continued. Many of you expect me to announce the end of SpaceX's human spaceflight program. You expect me to apologize and quietly fade away. You expect me to let fear win. He looked directly into the camera, and Carlos felt like Elon was speaking just to him. That's not what's going to happen. Instead, we're going to honor Sarah, Marcus, Lee, and Dimitri by doing exactly what they would want us to do. We're going to fix what went wrong. We're going to build better rockets. And we're going to continue reaching for the stars. The crowd of reporters was completely quiet now. But first, we're going to build the most advanced quality control system in the history of manufacturing. And we're going to ask Carlos Valdez to help us design it. Carlos couldn't believe what he was hearing. Not only was Elon defending him, he was asking him to help fix the problem. Carlos understands these systems better than anyone. He knows where the weaknesses are. He knows what we need to do to make sure this never happens again. Elon took a deep breath before his final words. To the families of our lost crew members, I promise you this: their deaths will not be in vain. We will learn from this tragedy. We will build safer rockets. And we will continue the mission they died trying to complete. Thank you. Elon walked away from the podium without taking questions. The reporters shouted after him, but he didn't. Look back in the Valdez living room. 3 people sat in stunned silence. Finally, Miguel spoke. Papa, does this mean you're still a hero? Carlos wiped tears from his eyes and hugged his son. I don't know, Mijo, but it means I still have a job to do. Something didn't add up, but Carlos was too relieved to question it. The next morning, Carlos woke up to a strange sound: silence. For the first time in a week, there were no reporters knocking on his door. No news vans lined his street. After Elon's speech, the media had packed up and left. His phone, which had been ringing constantly, was finally quiet too. But now it started, ringing again with a different kind of call. Carlos, this is Dr. Patterson from SpaceX. Mr. Musk would like to see you in his office today at 2 p.m. Carlos's heart started beating fast. His office? Elon Musk wants to see me. Yes, he wants to discuss your new role in quality control. After hanging up, Carlos told Maria about the meeting. What do you think he wants? She asked. I don't know. Maybe he wants to explain what really happened. But deep down, Carlos had questions that bothered him. If the explosion wasn't his fault, why had all the evidence pointed to his welding? Why had the investigation team been so sure? And why was Elon being so kind to a worker he had never met before? At 2 p.m., Carlos walked into SpaceX headquarters for the first time since his suspension. Workers in the hallway stopped to stare at him. Some smiled and nodded. Others whispered to each other behind his back that Elon's office was on the top floor, with big windows overlooking the rocket factory. Carlos had never been this high up in the building before. He could see the launch pad in the distance, still blackened from the explosion. Elon's secretary led him to a door marked CEO. Carlos knocked nervously. Come in, called a familiar voice. Elon Musk's office was smaller than Carlos expected. The walls were covered with pictures of Mars, rockets, and the first SpaceX launch years ago. Elon sat behind a simple desk, looking tired but alert. Carlos, please sit down, Elon said, standing up to shake his hand. How are you holding up? Better, thanks to your speech yesterday. My family and I, we can't thank you enough. Elon nodded but didn't smile. Carlos, I need to ask you something important. Do you trust me? It was a strange question. Of course, Mr. Musk. You saved my reputation. You saved my job. Good, because what I'm about to ask you might be the hardest thing you've ever done. Elon pulled out a tablet and showed Carlos engineering diagrams. We're building completely new quality control systems. Every weld, every connection, every part will be checked by computers, cameras, and 3 different inspectors. Carlos studied the diagrams. The new system was incredible, more advanced than anything he had ever seen. I want you to lead this project, Elon said. You'll have a team of 50 engineers working under you. Your job will be to make sure nothing like this explosion ever happens again. Carlos couldn't believe what he was hearing. You want me to be in charge of 50 engineers? But I'm just a welder. You're not just a welder. You're the person who understands these systems better than anyone. You know what can go wrong because you've seen it happen. But Mr. Musk, I don't have an engineering degree. I don't have management experience. Elon leaned forward. Carlos, Do you know why I'm giving you this job? Because you believe in me. Because you care more about getting it right than anyone else in this building. An engineer might design a perfect system on paper, but you'll design a system that actually works in the real world. Carlos felt overwhelmed. A week ago, he thought his career was over. Now he was being offered the most important job at SpaceX. There's something else, Elon continued. This project is top secret. You can't talk about it with anyone outside your team, not even your family. Why is it secret? Because if our competitors know what we're building, they might try to copy it. This system will give us a huge advantage in space exploration. Carlos nodded, though something still felt odd about all this secrecy. When do I start? Monday. But first, I need you to sign these papers. Elon handed him a thick stack of documents. Employment contract, security clearance, non-disclosure agreements. Carlos looked at the papers. There were so many legal words he didn't understand. Can I take these home and read them? I'm afraid not. The security requirements don't allow it. But don't worry, it's all standard stuff. You'll get a 50% raise, full benefits, and a bonus when the project is complete. 50% more money. Carlos thought about Miguel's college fund, about fixing their old car, about finally being able to take Maria on the vacation she deserved. Where do I sign? As Carlos signed page after page, Elon watched him carefully. Carlos, there's one more thing. This job will require a lot of travel. You'll need to visit other SpaceX facilities, work with teams in different states. How much travel? Maybe 1 week per month. Is that okay with your family? Carlos thought about Miguel and Maria. They would miss him, but this was the opportunity of a lifetime. I think so. Good. Your first trip is next week. You'll fly to our facility in Hawthorne, California to meet your new team. After Carlos finished signing the papers, Elon walked him to the door. Carlos, I want you to know something. What happened with the explosion? It's going to haunt all of us for a long time. But your work on this new system will help us honor the memory of those 4 astronauts. I won't let you down, Mr. Musk. I know you won't. As Carlos left the building, his head was spinning. In 1 hour, his whole life had changed. He went from disgraced welder to head of quality control for the most important space company in the world. But as he drove home, questions kept nagging at him. Why had Elon been so sure the explosion wasn't his fault? How did he know Carlos would be good at management when they had never worked together before? And why did everything have to be so secret? Carlos pushed these thoughts away. Elon Musk was a genius who had built rockets, electric cars, and internet companies. He must know what he was doing. At home, Miguel ran to greet him at the door. Papa, how was your meeting with the famous rocket man? Good, Mijo. Very good. Papa got a new job. Are you still going to build rockets? Even better. I'm going to make sure all the rockets are perfect before they fly. Miguel's eyes lit up. So no more explosions? No more explosions, Carlos promised, hoping it was true. That night, Carlos and Maria celebrated with ice cream and Miguel's favorite movie. For the first time in a week, Carlos felt happy. He had his job back, his reputation was saved, and his family was proud of him again. But late that night, after Maria and Miguel were asleep, Carlos sat at his kitchen table thinking. He pulled out his old welding notebook, where he kept records of every job he had ever done. That he found the entry for July 15th, the day he had welded fuel tank number 7. His notes were detailed, as always. Temperature, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 65%. Material, grade A titanium alloy. Weld pattern, standard overlap technique. Visual inspection, perfect. X-ray inspection, passed. Pressure test, passed. Everything had been perfect. So why had the tank failed? Carlos closed the notebook and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Tomorrow he would start the most important job of his life. He just wished he understood why he was getting it. 6 months later, the new Starship rocket stood gleaming in the Texas sun, identical to the one that had exploded, but completely different inside. Carlos walked around the base of the rocket with his clipboard, checking every connection, every weld, every bolt. Team 7, report status on fuel line connections. Carlos spoke into his radio. All connections verified and double-checked, sir, came the reply. Carlos smiled. 6 months ago, he was just a welder. Now he led a team of 50 quality control specialists, and everyone called him sir. It still felt strange. The new quality control system was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Tiny cameras watched every step of construction. Computer programs analyzed each weld using artificial intelligence. Every part got checked by 3 different people using 5 different methods. "Papa, can I see your badge?" 9-year-old Miguel asked during lunch break. He wore a small hard hat and carried a toy clipboard. Pretending to be a quality inspector like his father, Carlos showed Miguel his new security badge, Carlos Valdez, Director of Quality Assurance. "That's a really long title," Miguel said. "It means Papa makes sure everything is safe," Carlos explained. Miguel nodded seriously. "So the astronauts won't get hurt this time?" "That's right, Mijo. We've made this rocket as safe as we possibly can." And it was true. The new rocket had been tested more than any spacecraft in history. Every system had backups. Every backup had backups. If something could go wrong, Carlos's team had thought of it and prepared for it. The work had consumed Carlos's life for 6 months. He traveled to SpaceX facilities in California, Texas, and Florida. He worked 12-hour days designing new inspection procedures. He personally trained hundreds of workers on the new safety systems, but the travel was hard on his family. Carlos missed Miguel's school play and Maria's birthday dinner. Some weeks he was home only on weekends. "I understand this job is important," Maria said one evening. "But Miguel asks me every day when you're coming home." "Just a few more months," Carlos promised. "Once we launch successfully, things will calm down." Maria nodded, but Carlos could see the sadness in her eyes. 3 weeks before the new launch, the crew for the second moon mission arrived at SpaceX. Captain James Morrison, the mission commander, was a former Navy pilot who had specifically volunteered to fly after the explosion. "I want to finish what Sarah Chin started," Captain Morrison told reporters. "She died believing in this mission. The least we can do is complete it." Carlos met the crew during their final spacecraft inspection. The 4 astronauts walked through the rocket, asking detailed questions about every system. "Mr. Valdez," Captain Morrison said, "I've read about your quality control work. My crew and I want you to know how much we trust what you've built here." "Thank you, Captain. We've done everything possible to keep you safe." "I know you have. That's why we're willing to fly." That evening, Carlos visited the memorial wall that had been built near the launch pad. For photos showed the smiling faces of Sarah Chun, Marcus Webb, Li Wei, and Dmitry Petrov. Fresh flowers appeared every day, left by workers who wanted to remember them. Carlos stood in front of Sarah's photo. "I promise your mission won't fail again," he whispered. Launch day -1 week, the families of the original crew came to SpaceX for a special ceremony. Elon had asked Carlos to attend, saying his quality control work honored their loved one's memory. Sarah Chin's 12-year-old daughter Emma was now 13. She had grown taller, but still carried the same sadness in her eyes. "Are you the man who's making sure the rocket is safe this time?" she asked Carlos. "Yes, I am." Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the picture I drew for my mom before her mission. Will you make sure it gets to the moon this time?" Carlos looked at the drawing. It showed a stick figure astronaut on the moon's surface with "Come home safe, Mommy," written in faded purple crayon. "I promise it will get there," Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma smiled for the first time since he'd met her. "Thank you." Launch day -3 days, Carlos barely slept. He walked through the rocket factory at all hours, double-checking systems that had already been checked a dozen times. His team followed his example, working around the clock. "Carlos, you need to get some rest," Dr. Patterson said, finding him in the quality control lab at 3 a.m. "I can't rest. Not yet. For people died because something went wrong. I won't let that happen again. The rocket is perfect, Carlos. Your systems are perfect. You've done everything humanly possible." Carlos looked at the screens showing thousands of sensor readings, all green. "What if it's not enough? Then it's not your fault. But I believe it will be enough." Launch day -1 day, Elon found Carlos sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring at a cold cup of coffee. The same cafeteria where Elon had sat after the explosion 6 months ago. "How are you feeling?" Elon asked, sitting down across from him. "Terrified," Carlos admitted. "What if I miss something? What if all this work isn't enough?" "Carlos, do you know what the difference is between the first rocket and this one? Better quality control systems." "No, the difference is you. Your obsession with perfection. Your refusal to accept anything less than perfect." Carlos looked up. "But what if There are no what-ifs, Elon interrupted. You've built the safest spacecraft in human history, not because of the technology, but because of your dedication. I just don't want to let anyone down again. Elon's expression grew serious. Carlos, you never let anyone down the first time. But the investigation said the investigation was wrong about some things. Elon stood up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we're going to the moon. Launch day. Carlos stood at the same fence where he and Miguel had watched the first rocket explode. This time, he wore his SpaceX director badge and carried a radio connecting him to mission control. Miguel, now 9.5, held his father's hand. Papa, are you nervous? A little, Mijo, but I trust the work we did. The countdown began exactly as it had 6 months ago. T-minus 10 minutes and counting. But this time was different. This time, Carlos knew every bolt, every weld, every connection had been checked by the most advanced quality control system ever built. T-minus 5 minutes and counting. Carlos thought about Sarah Chen's daughter and the drawing in his pocket that would finally reach the moon. T-minus 1 minute and counting. Miguel squeezed his father's hand. Papa, is it going to work this time? Carlos looked at his son, then at the rocket standing tall and proud on the launch pad. Yes, Mijo, this time it's going to work. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The engines fired in perfect sequence. The rocket rose slowly, then faster, climbing toward the stars. Every system worked exactly as designed. No explosions. No failures. Just a perfect launch carrying 4 brave souls toward humanity's future. As the rocket disappeared into the blue sky, Carlos felt tears on his cheeks. 6 months of guilt, fear, and obsessive work had led to this moment. The mission to the moon would succeed. Sarah Chen's daughter would see her mother's memory honored. And Carlos Valdez, the welder who had been blamed for the first tragedy, had helped build the systems that made the second attempt possible. But deep in his heart, one question still bothered him. Why had Elon been so certain from the beginning that Carlos could do this job? 3 days after the successful launch, the second moon mission was working perfectly. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio from space. Houston, Starship has successfully entered lunar orbit. All systems are green, beginning preparations for surface operations. In mission control, hundreds of engineers cheered and hugged each other. The rocket that exploded 6 months ago had taught them lessons that made this success possible. Carlos sat in the back of the control room, watching the celebration. He should have felt pure joy, but something nagged at him. During all those months of building quality control systems, he had learned a lot about how rockets fail. He knew more about structural engineering now than most college graduates. And the more he learned, the more he wondered about fuel tank number 7. That after the celebration ended, Carlos stayed behind to study the old investigation reports on his computer. He had security clearance now to see files he couldn't access before that. He pulled up the detailed analysis of the tank failure. The crack had started along a welded seam, just as everyone said. But as Carlos read deeper into the technical reports, something caught his attention. The crack pattern didn't look like a welding failure. It looked like stress fracture, the kind of damage that happens when metal gets bent or twisted beyond its limits. Carlos zoomed in on the high-resolution photos of the tank wreckage. He had seen thousands of welding failures during his career. This didn't look like any of them. Working late again, Dr. Patterson appeared behind Carlos. Dr. Patterson, can I ask you something? You've been investigating rocket failures for 20 years. Does this crack pattern look like a welding error to you? Dr. Patterson studied the photos on the screen. You know, now that you mention it, I always thought it looked more like transport damage, like something hit the tank during shipping. Carlos's heart started beating faster. Transport damage. When we move rockets from the factory to the launch pad, they're under tremendous stress. If a support beam isn't properly secured, it can vibrate against the tank wall. But the investigation concluded it was my welding. Dr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. The investigation concluded what it needed to conclude. What do you mean? Carlos, you're a good man, and you've done incredible work here. Maybe it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. But Carlos couldn't let it lie. That night, he went home and called his old supervisor, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, I need to ask you about Tank 7. Do you remember if there were any problems during transport to the launch pad? There was a long pause. Carlos, Why are you asking about this now? Everything worked out fine. You have a great job. Your family is happy. I just need to know the truth. Another pause. There was an incident during transport. One of the support clamps came loose. But we reported it and inspected the tank. Everything looked fine. Who inspected it? The transport team did a visual inspection. They said there was no visible damage. Carlos felt like puzzle pieces were falling into place. But they didn't do X-ray inspection? No, that would have required moving the rocket back to the factory. Mr. Musk said we were on a tight schedule. After hanging up, Carlos sat in his kitchen, staring at his old welding notebook. He flipped to July 15th again and read his notes about Tank 7. Perfect welding. Passed all inspections. No problems. Then he flipped forward to August 20th, the day the rocket was transported to the launch pad. He had made a note, heard loud banging during transport, told supervisor about loose clamp. Carlos had forgotten about that note until now. He had been so focused on his welding work that he hadn't thought about what happened to the tank after he finished with it. The next morning, Carlos couldn't focus on work. He kept thinking about the transport incident, the crack pattern, and Dr. Patterson's strange comment about what the investigation needed to conclude. During lunch break, he decided to visit the transport garage where the support equipment was stored. Maybe he could find the clamp that had come loose. The garage supervisor, Tom Reeves, had worked at SpaceX for 8 years. He knew every piece of equipment. The clamp from the Tank 7 transport. Tom scratched his head. That's a weird question. Why do you want to know? I'm trying to understand what happened during the explosion. For my quality control work. Tom led Carlos to a corner of the garage where damaged equipment was stored. Here it is. Clamp number 47. The locking mechanism failed during transport. See how the metal is bent? Carlos examined the clamp. It was designed to hold the rocket steady during the 5-mile journey from factory to launch pad. When it failed, the heavy clamp would have swung against the tank wall like a hammer. Did you report this failure? Of course. Filled out all the paperwork. Recommended full X-ray inspection of Tank 7. What happened to your recommendation? Tom's expression changed. It got overruled. Someone higher up said visual inspection was enough. Who overruled it? I don't know. The order came from management. Carlos felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. A transport clamp failure that wasn't properly investigated. A crack that looked like impact damage, not welding failure. An investigation that blamed him without considering other possibilities. That evening, Carlos sat at his dinner table with Maria and Miguel, but he barely touched his food. Papa, you look sad, Miguel said. Isn't the rocket mission going good? The mission is perfect, Mijo. Papa's just thinking about work stuff. But Carlos wasn't just thinking about work. He was thinking about how quickly the investigation had focused on his welding, how eager everyone had been to blame him, how Elon had defended him so strongly and then given him such an important job, almost like Elon had felt guilty about something. Later that night, Carlos couldn't sleep. He went to his computer and looked up everything he could find about transport failures in aerospace manufacturing. What he learned made his stomach sink. Transport damage was common in rocket construction. Companies usually did extensive inspections after moving large components. The fact that SpaceX had skipped X-ray inspection was unusual and dangerous. Carlos found technical papers showing that transport-related cracks could grow for months before causing failure. The timeline matched perfectly with Tank 7. But if Elon knew about the transport failure, why had he let Carlos take the blame? And why had he been so quick to defend him and offer him a promotion? Unless Carlos sat back in his chair as a terrible thought occurred to him. What if Elon had known the truth all along? What if he had let Carlos believe he was responsible because he needed Carlos to be motivated by guilt? A person who thought he had killed 4 astronauts would work harder than anyone to make sure it never happened again. A person carrying that guilt would be obsessed with perfection, and Carlos had been obsessed. For 6 months, he had worked 18-hour days. He had designed quality control systems that went far beyond anything necessary. He had personally inspected every connection, every weld, every bolt. The successful moon mission was possible because Carlos had been driven by guilt to create something perfect. But what if that guilt had been based on a lie? Carlos closed his computer and went to bed, but his mind kept racing. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to keep digging for the truth or accept the comfortable life that Elon had given him. The problem was, Carlos had never been the kind of person who could live with comfortable lies. 2 weeks after the moon landing, the crew returned to Earth as heroes. The moon landing had been perfect. Every system had worked flawlessly. The world celebrated not just the success, but the incredible comeback after tragedy. Captain Morrison and his crew were interviewed on every television show. They talked about walking on the moon, conducting experiments, and planting a flag next to a memorial for the 4 astronauts who had died trying to get there. But Carlos barely watched the celebrations. He was too busy reading files and asking questions. During his lunch break, he visited the records department at SpaceX. With his security clearance, he could access almost any document he wanted. "I need to see the complete investigation file for the Tank 7 failure," he told the records clerk. "That's a big file. About 500 pages. Are you sure you want all of it?" "Everything." For 3 days, Carlos read every report, every email, every meeting note from the investigation. What he found made him feel sick. The investigation team had found evidence of transport damage on day 2. They had photos of the loose clamp. They had reports about the impact during shipping. But somehow, none of this information had made it into the final report. Instead, the final report focused entirely on welding defects and manufacturing errors. Carlos's name appeared 47 times. The transport incident was mentioned only once, in a footnote that said, "No significant damage observed." Carlos found emails between Dr. Patterson and other investigators discussing the transport damage. One email from Dr. Patterson said, "The crack pattern clearly shows impact damage, not welding failure. Recommend investigating transport procedures." But that email was dated 3 days before Dr. Patterson had told Carlos that his welding was responsible. Carlos printed out the most important documents and put them in a folder. His hands shook as he realized what he had discovered. The investigation team had known the truth from the beginning. They had known Carlos wasn't responsible, but they had blamed him anyway. That evening, Carlos couldn't eat dinner. He sat at the table staring at the folder of evidence while Maria and Miguel talked about their day. "Papa, you're not listening," Miguel said. "I asked if you want to see my rocket drawing." "Sorry, Mijo. Papa's just thinking." Miguel showed him a crayon drawing of a rocket flying to the moon. "Look, I wrote your name on the rocket because you helped build it." Carlos looked at the drawing. Miguel had written Papa's rocket in big letters on the side. His son was so proud of him, so happy that his father was a hero who built spaceships. How could Carlos tell Miguel that everything they believed was based on lies? "It's beautiful, Mijo. Can we go watch the next rocket launch together?" Of course. But Carlos wondered if there would be a next rocket launch. If he revealed what he had learned, it might destroy SpaceX. It might end the space program. It might crush Miguel's dreams of becoming an astronaut. The next morning, Carlos couldn't focus on work. His team was celebrating their success, designing even better quality control systems for future missions. But Carlos felt like he was living in a fake world where nothing was real. At 8:10 a.m., he made a decision. He walked to Elon's office and asked his secretary for a meeting. "Mr. Musk is very busy today. Can this wait?" "No," Carlos said firmly. "It can't wait." An hour later, Carlos sat across from Elon in the same office where he had been offered his promotion. But this time, Carlos had a folder full of evidence in his lap. "Carlos, you look troubled," Elon said. "Is everything okay with the quality control systems?" "Mr. Musk, I need to ask you about Tank 7. Elon's expression didn't change, but Carlos noticed his hands tense up slightly. "What about Tank 7? That investigation is closed. We've moved on, have we?" Carlos opened his folder and pulled out the photos of the loose transport clamp. "Did you know about this?" Elon looked at the photos for a long moment. "Carlos, why are you bringing this up now? You have a great job, your family is happy, because I can't live with lies." Carlos spread more documents across Elon's desk. "These emails show that Dr. Patterson knew the crack was caused by transport damage, not my welding. This report shows that you overruled the recommendation for X-ray inspection after the clamp failure." Elon stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the launch pad where both the failure and success had happened. "Carlos, sometimes the truth is more complicated than it appears." "What does that mean?" Elon turned around, and for the first time since Carlos had known him, the famous entrepreneur looked genuinely sad. "It means I made a terrible decision. and I've been living with the guilt ever since." Carlos felt his heart pounding. What decision? Elon sat back down and put his head in his hands. The transport failure. I knew about it. I knew the clamp had hit the tank. I knew we should have done X-ray inspection. Then why didn't you? Because we were behind schedule. Because I was impatient. Because I thought a visual inspection would be enough. Elon's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was arrogant. And stupid. Carlos stared at him. So you knew the explosion wasn't my fault? I've known from the first day. The investigation team found the evidence immediately. But I let them focus on your welding because... Elon paused, struggling with his words. Because why? Because I needed someone to be obsessed with fixing our quality control problems. I needed someone who would work day and night to make sure this never happened again. I needed someone who felt personally responsible for those 4 deaths. Carlos felt like he had been punched in the stomach. You let me think I killed 4 people so I would work harder? Yes. Elon's voice was broken, and I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. My family suffered for months. My son cried himself to sleep thinking his papa was a murderer. We had to move houses because of death threats. I know, and there's no excuse for what I did. Carlos stood up, his hands shaking with anger. Then why? Why put us through that hell? Elon looked up at him with tears in his eyes. Because if I had told you the truth from the beginning, you would have gone back to being a good welder. But we didn't need a good welder. We needed someone obsessed with perfection. Someone who would check every connection 3 times. Someone who would build quality control systems so good that nothing could ever go wrong again. Carlos realized the horrible truth. His guilt, his sleepless nights, his obsession with perfect quality control, it had all been based on Elon's lie. The rocket that just returned from the moon is the safest spacecraft ever built, Elon continued. Not because of our engineers, or our computers, or our money. Because of you. Because of what you built after you thought you had failed. Carlos sank back into his chair. So the 4 crew members died because I was impatient and careless. Because I pushed for a launch schedule we weren't ready for. Because I didn't properly investigate the transport damage. Elon's voice cracked. Their deaths are on me, not you. But why tell me now? Why not just let me keep believing it was my fault? Because you deserve the truth. And because I can't live with this lie anymore. Carlos looked at the man who had been his hero, who had given him the most important job of his life, who had made his family proud. Now he saw Elon for what he really was. Someone who had made a terrible mistake and then made it worse by lying about it. What happens now? Carlos asked. That's up to you, Elon said. You can expose the truth and destroy my reputation. You can demand that I publicly admit what really happened. You can sue me for everything I'm worth. And if I do, then you do. I deserve whatever consequences come from this. Carlos sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about Miguel's proud smile when he talked about his papa building rockets. Thinking about the successful moon mission that was only possible because of the systems he had built. Thinking about the future missions that would be safer because of his work. I need time to think, Carlos said finally. Take all the time you need. Your job will be here when you're ready, whether you forgive me or not. Carlos walked out of Elon's office carrying the weight of the truth. The comfortable life he had built over the past 8 months was based on a lie. But the work he had done, the systems he had built, the lives he would save in the future, that was real. Now he had to decide what mattered more, justice for the past or safety for the future. That evening Carlos drove home in silence, his mind spinning like a tornado. Everything he thought he knew about the last 8 months was wrong. The guilt that had driven him to work 18-hour days, the shame that had made him check every weld 3 times, the fear that had pushed him to create the most advanced quality control system in the world. All of it was based on Elon's Lie.at home. Miguel ran to greet him as always. Papa, did you see the news? The astronauts said your quality control system was perfect. They said it's the reason they made it safely to the moon. Carlos looked at his son's proud, shining face. Miguel wore a SpaceX t-shirt and had drawn rockets all over his homework folder. His bedroom walls were covered with pictures of spaceships and astronauts. That's wonderful, Mijo, Carlos said, his voice hollow. Papa, are you sick? You look sad. Just tired from work. But Carlos wasn't tired. He was angry. He was confused. And he was heartbroken. During dinner, Maria talked about her day at the grocery store. Everyone in town knows you now, Carlos. Mrs. Rodriguez said her grandson wants to be an engineer because of you. The bank manager asked for your autograph. Carlos nodded and tried to smile, but the food tasted like cardboard. After Miguel went to bed, Carlos sat on his back porch with Maria, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, the moon still had footprints from the astronauts who had landed safely because of systems he had built. "What's wrong?" Maria asked. "You've been quiet all evening." Carlos almost told her everything. But how could he explain that their hero story was really a lie? That the man who had saved Carlos's reputation had been the one who destroyed it in the first place? "Just thinking about work," he said. "Carlos, you need to learn to relax. The mission was perfect. Everyone says you're a hero." "A hero?" Carlos almost laughed. Heroes didn't get manipulated by billionaires. Heroes didn't spend months believing they had killed 4 people when they were innocent. The next morning, Carlos didn't go to work. He sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and staring at the folder of evidence. He could take these documents to the news media. He could expose Elon's lies to the world. He could watch SpaceX's stock price crash and Elon's reputation crumble. But what would happen to the space program? What would happen to the thousands of workers who had jobs because of SpaceX? What would happen to future missions to Mars, to the dream of making humanity a multi-planet species? And what would happen to Miguel's dreams? Carlos's phone rang. It was Rebecca Martinez from Mission Control. "Carlos, we missed you at work today. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine. Just taking a personal day." "Good. You deserve it. I wanted to call and thank you personally. The astronauts told me that your quality control systems are the best they've ever seen. Captain Morrison said he felt completely safe because he knew you had checked everything." After hanging up, Carlos felt even more confused. The work he had done was real. The lives he had saved were real. The safety improvements he had created would protect astronauts for decades to come. But it was all built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. That afternoon, Carlos drove to the SpaceX Memorial Wall near the launch pad. 4 smiling faces looked down at him: Sarah Chun, Marcus Webb, Li Wei, and Dmitry Petrov. Fresh flowers had been placed in front of each photo. "I'm sorry," Carlos whispered to Sarah's picture. "I'm sorry I let everyone blame me for your death. When I knew I was careful, I should have fought harder for the truth." A voice behind him said, "They wouldn't want you to blame yourself." Carlos turned around. Elon stood 10 feet away, looking older and more tired than Carlos had ever seen him. "What are you doing here?" Carlos asked. "I come here every week to remind myself of the cost of my decisions." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Elon asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to destroy you for what you did to my family. I understand. But another part of me knows that the work we did together will save lives." Elon nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'll accept the consequences." Carlos looked at the photos again. "What would you do if you were me?" "I can't answer that. This decision has to be yours. The families of these 4 astronauts, do they know the truth?" Elon's face grew even sadder. "No, they still think it was a manufacturing error. They deserve to know." "Yes, they do." Carlos made his decision. "I want you to call a press conference. I want you to tell the world what really happened. All of it." Elon looked surprised. "That will destroy my reputation. People will never trust me again." "Good. Maybe you'll think twice before playing with people's lives next time." "And what about you? What about your job?" Carlos had thought about this. "I'll stay and continue the quality control work. Not for you, but for the astronauts who are counting on us to keep them safe. The media will crucify me. They'll say I'm the worst kind of leader." "You are," Carlos said bluntly. "You let an innocent man take the blame for your mistake. You put my family through hell to motivate me. You lied to everyone." Elon nodded. "You're right. But you also had the courage to tell me the truth eventually. And the quality control systems we built will prevent this from ever happening again. So you're not going to quit." Carlos looked at the memorial photos one more time. "These 4 people died because the systems weren't good enough. I'm going to make sure no one else dies for the same reason." 1 week later, Elon held a press conference in the same parking lot where he had defended Carlos 8 months earlier. This time, he told the complete truth about the transport failure, the cover-up, and his decision to let Carlos take the blame. The reaction was swift and brutal. SpaceX stock crashed. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Elon's reputation was destroyed overnight. But something unexpected happened too. Engineers from around the world sent messages of support to Carlos. They shared their own stories of being blamed for failures that weren't their fault, of being scapegoated by leaders who couldn't face the truth. Carlos became a symbol not just of quality control, but of the workers who actually build the dreams that visionaries imagine. Point 6. Months later, Mars launch day Miguel, now 10, stood at the fence with his father. The rocket on the launch pad was the most advanced spacecraft ever built, incorporating every lesson learned from the explosion, every system perfected through Carlos's obsessive attention to detail. "Papa, are you nervous?" Miguel asked Carlos. Watched the rocket through the fence he had grown up beside. "No, Mijo. I know every bolt, every weld, every connection. This rocket will fly." The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. This time, Carlos didn't hold his breath. He knew the rocket was safe. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The rocket rose into the sky, carrying humanity's first Mars colonists toward the red planet. It flew not, despite the explosion that had happened 2 years ago, but because of everything that explosion had taught them about failure, responsibility, and the price of reaching for impossible dreams. As the rocket disappeared into the blue Texas sky, Carlos put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Someday, Mijo, that could be you up there." Miguel looked up at his father, the man who had been blamed for humanity's greatest failure and who had become the architect of its greatest success. "I'd like that, Papa, but only if you build the rocket." Carlos smiled, watching the contrail fade into nothing. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with explosions that teach us how to fly. Sometimes the greatest achievements come from the ashes of our worst failures. And sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who need our forgiveness the most. The truth had been painful, but it had also been necessary. Because in the end, building rockets wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about learning to trust each other with the most precious thing we have, human life. And Carlos Valdez, the welder who had saved the space program by refusing to accept anything less than perfect, knew that the next rocket would be even safer than the last. That was the end of Carlos and Miguel's incredible journey from tragedy to triumph. Where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I love hearing from viewers around the world. If this tale touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing adventures like this one. Your support means everything and helps us bring you fresh content every week. Most importantly, share this video with your friends and family. These powerful messages about courage, truth, and never giving up deserve to spread far and wide. Together, we can inspire others and create a ripple effect of kindness and awareness across the globe. Thank you for being part of our community, and I'll see you in the next video.